Okay. Well, thanks again. What a wonderful panel. And I'd like to now turn this over to my partner here, Barbara Fields, the Executive Director of the Association for Global New Thought, who is the moderator for this next panel. Barbara, are you here?
Yes, we're all here.
All right. Over to you. Looking forward.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get started. So thank you, all of the listeners who have been very generously joining us since early this morning, 8 o'clock Pacific time. We're very happy to be beginning now a panel that's called A New Leadership Model for the 21st Century. And joining us are Irvin Laszlo, Ambassador Anwar Chowdhury, Steve McIntosh, and Bill Urey. And before we get started, I'm going to invite my assistant at the Association for Global New Thought, Penny Little, to just give a little bit of background information on each of our panelists today, who could actually, if we were to give all of the accomplishments of these people, it would take quite a long time. But we want to at least give a little sketch for each one so that you're fully aware of who you're in conversation with today. So, Penny, would you do that, please?
I will. Hi, everyone. The first speaker is Irvin Laszlo. He's the founder and president of the Club of Budapest, chancellor of the Giordano Bruno University, founder of the General Evolution Research Group, fellow of the World Academy of Arts and Sciences, member of the Hungarian Academy of Science and International Academy of Philosophy of Science, and Senator of International Medici Academy. He's also won numerous awards and was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 and 2005. And next is Ambassador Chowdhury, who has devoted many years as an inspirational champion for sustainable peace and development and has ardently advanced the cause of the global movement for the culture of peace that's energized civil societies all over the world. As a career diplomat, permanent representative to the United Nations, president of the UN Security Council, president of UNICEF Board, UN Under-Secretary General, the Senate senior special advisor to the UN General Assembly president, and recipient of the Youth on Peace Award. It goes on and on. You just can't list all of his accomplishments. Steve McIntosh is a leader in the integral philosophy movement and author of Evolution's Purpose, an integral interpretation of the scientific story of our origins and integral consciousness in the future of evolution. He currently works as a founding partner of the New Social Policy Foundation, the Institute for Cultural Evolution. William Urey co-founded Harvard's program on negotiation and is currently a distinguished senior fellow at the Harvard Negotiation Project. He co-authored with Roger Fisher Getting to Yes, a 10 million copy bestseller translated into over 35 languages, and the author of the award-winning Getting Past No. So those are our four panelist speakers.
Thank you, Penny.
You're welcome.
Well, hello, everyone, in whichever time zone you're in. Thank you for joining us today. This is, in a certain way, it's kind of nice to be in conversation with the men leaders of our movement of today. I wanted to let folks know that we're going to begin by asking a question and having a discussion with Irvin Laszlo. Irvin happens to be in Italy at this point. It's almost midnight his time, so I thought that we would start there just in case the hour became too late. So I'll begin and ask a question, Irvin, and then you can just give me your impressions as they come to you. The Club of Budapest has just held its 21st anniversary conference, The Flight of the Butterfly, from the vision of planetary consciousness to a platform for planetary action. Thank God. Would you please share a little about the title of your conference, what that means to you, and what you feel the conference accomplished, and what you feel this has to say about new leadership models for the 21st century?
Well, thanks very much, Barbara, for referring to this. Actually, the conference has not taken place yet, unless you can already read the future, which I can't. It's going to be on December 5 and 6. We have just...
Oh, okay. Well, I can read the future, evidently. But can you tell us a little bit about what you have in store and why did you choose this topic?
Well, the Club of Budapest was founded 21 years ago, and jointly at that time, this is Dalai Lama with Peter Ustinov, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Yehudi Menuhin, and Václav Havel. So then others joined us. And the idea was at that time that we are going to talk about a new consciousness. Well, this was 21 years ago, 93, and then it seemed that one, especially esoteric, far out, what's going to come onto the international scene with such an esoteric idea. Well, I think we contributed something because whether with us or without us or despite us, but this idea that a new consciousness is needed to solve our problems, to survive on this planet and to evolve, that has taken hold. And what we meant by planetary consciousness at the time was that it's not that the planet is conscious. At the time, people didn't know what we mean by it. Now, of course, people talk about global consciousness, planetary consciousness, etc. So it's a much more part of a standard view of the world. But we thought that we should talk about the need to understand who we are and what kind of a world we live in, and that we are part of this world. At that time, the concept of oneness wasn't very much yet on everyday discourse, but we had brought forth with the idea of a planetary consciousness, the consciousness of our oneness with each other. We actually said so. We wrote a manifesto that actually I drafted, and the Dalai Lama went and worked on it with me, and then we finally published that just over 21 years ago. And there we are talking about the planetary consciousness being the feeling and the sensing and the ethics and the ethos, we said, of living on Earth as part of a species, part of one species. So now the time has passed. 21 years have passed. In a way, we are grown up, and we want to celebrate that. We now have about 100 members. Two-thirds of them are very well-known personalities. And we are calling them together to ask which way shall we go. I thought that's why we gave it the title that let's think of ourselves as a butterfly, the famous butterfly effect. So our little butterfly flaps its wings, and it did create some kind of a little current of thought about the place and role of consciousness in the world and how we have to enter onto this world with that kind of a new thinking that Einstein talked about, so a new consciousness for a new world. And now that we have reached that age where you are supposed to be grown up, an adult at 31, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do next? And since I can't read the future, I can't tell you what our members are going to tell us, but the question is, among the questions that we are posing is, what can we do? How can we, for example, create a sustainable world by reinforcing the current world? Can you do that? Or would you have to look for beyond the current world? Is there such a thing as a sustainable world or sustainable development? Or is there really a non-linearity in the world, a kind of a development which goes through this chaos point or bifurcation point? And in that case, shall we try to stabilize what there is? Or shall we try to move on to the next stage? And how can we do that? So these are among the questions that we'll be asking. And then whom should we address? These are things that we should be thinking about it here too,
I know, I see that. And also I'm aware that with Masami and Hiru Sayonji of the Goi Peace Foundation, Byako Shinko-kai, and the World Peace Prayer Society, you're in the process of launching the Fuji Declaration, and I'd like to read just a sentence from the beginning. A new phase in the evolution of human civilization is on the horizon, with deepening states of crisis bringing unrest to all parts of the world. There is a growing need for change in our ways of thinking and acting. We now have the choice of either spiraling into deepening peril or breaking through to a world of dignity and well-being for all. So it seems as if, of course, you've given this so much thought, so in this particular declaration, you're getting closer to answering, hopefully, some of the questions that will be also brought up at the conference. Is that right?
Yes, Barbara, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I drafted the declaration, and this Masami Sarionji has developed it further. But it's a draft that grew out of what I call first the Oneness Declaration. And when Masami and Hiro Sarionji came to visit me, about 8-9 months ago, and then we realized that would be a good foundation for developing into a declaration where we are talking about a divine spirit, a divine spark that is at the heart of humanity that we have to rekindle. And I think it's a very important notion. I think it's a notion that we have in us this natural instinct or intuition that we do belong to each other. We are part of this planet, and there's no healthy organism that wouldn't be part of it, and wouldn't be, at least on some level, whether conscious or just instinctive, would realize that. So this declaration talks to that point, that we have in us something that will make us whole, that make us one, and that it's a temporary aberration, as it were, that we are forgetting that, and we are moving into the world of just unbridled competition and forgetting our coherence, forgetting our belongingness to one another. So thanks for bringing it up. I should add, perhaps, just to take 1 second, that we are going to present this declaration, and we're already presenting it through the internet, so that people who would like to endorse it are most welcome to endorse it and to comment on it. But we are going to be formally launching it at a double event, which is going to take place at 2 places at the same time, but on 2 different dates, even though it's the same time. On the evening of May 16th at the concert hall in Copenhagen, Denmark, and in the morning of May 17th at the foot of Mount Fuji in Japan. Only the evening and Copenhagen and the morning at Mount Fuji is the same time, of course. It's just a different time zone. So we're going to have a simultaneous broadcast and telecast on first an event in Copenhagen, then immediately following on that an event at the Mount Fuji. And we hope that this declaration will embrace East and West and will rekindle, actually, that spark which is in all of us.
Yes, thank you. We have time before next spring to hear more about this initiative, and the people who are listening will have the opportunity to follow that. Yes. So I'd like to. I'd now thank you. In case you have to leave us before we actually come to the end of the panel, I just wanted to thank you again, Irvin, for joining us today, and not only that, but for the lifetime of work that you've dedicated to these ideas and these causes. You're truly a pioneering soul, as Barbara Marx Hubbard would put it, and we appreciate you greatly. You're you're an international treasure.
Well, your initiative is so important that I will always be happy to be part of it. Oneness is the way forward, and we have to recognize that it's an imperative. It's something that it's not a chance. It's something that we have to follow. The alternative is just too unfortunate even to discuss. But I think we are moving toward oneness, and to do this and further this is a very great opportunity. I'm very happy to be part of it.
Well, thank you. I appreciated what you said just a little while ago about the fact that maybe humanity is in a state of anomaly right now. In other words, it's not really expressing its true nature, but we've just hit a glitch in the trajectory of human consciousness over eons of time. And I know that it's a bit of a stretch to make a segue, but we are talking about leadership models for this new century and this new way of thinking. So I'd like to include now the rest of our panel, starting with the notion that we actually have to challenge ourselves to draw from our own years of self-development, spiritual practice, and expertise, because in our own ways, we've been trying to demonstrate or become living models for new leadership in this century. It brings to mind the change. We wish to become the change that we want to see in the world. So from an integral perspective, we can speak of universal intrinsic values that are common and comprehensible to all people. And this is regardless of the nation or the culture or your religion or ideology. So I think I'm going to start by asking Steve McIntosh, what is spiritually motivated leadership?
Well, thank you, Barbara, for asking me that excellent question. I can say that leadership in general, I think, means fulfilling people's needs. And at the spiritual level, fulfilling people's needs means helping them fulfill their self-actualization need. So spiritually motivated leadership, I think, is always looking for the spiritual element in whatever work that leadership is engaged in. The way I like to interpret that, to make it more specific but still at the general level, is to talk about spiritual leadership in terms of the good, the true, and the beautiful, right? The primary values, as argued by some philosophers, that are really a way of talking about spirit and bringing it into our work that is inclusive of just about everybody's belief system in one way or another. And focusing on the beautiful, the true, and the good as ways of bringing out spirituality and leadership, I think that means being willing to be self-critical. It means being conscious of the moral duties of leadership. The morality of interpersonal relationships are often either promoted or they can be significantly diminished by good or bad leadership, conscious leadership, as it's called. And focusing leadership, always bringing it back to what John Mackey calls higher purpose, right? That relates to the beautiful, the true, and the good as well. So from my perspective, conscious leadership, the model of it is the model of looking for self-actualization in whatever we're doing. And the way to sort of uncover the self-actualizing possibilities of whatever work is being led or followed comes from seeing into the heart of these intrinsic values. So it's literally along the lines of the good, the true, and the beautiful that our consciousness evolves. So when I think about a model for leadership, for example, in the 90s, when I was in the business world, Peter Senge's book about learning organizations, The Fifth Discipline, became widespread and very popular. And now, over 20 years later, we're beginning to see a model which we might call going beyond learning organizations to organizations that are specifically focused on evolving consciousness, evolving the consciousness of the people who are being served, evolving the consciousness of those who are involved in the organization. And that requires that the people who undertake the role of leadership do their best to be aware of their own level of consciousness and try to develop it themselves in the process of leadership itself. It can be self-actualizing, and that's why it kind of comes back to the beautiful, the true, and the good as ways that we can lead spiritually and make the world a better place. I could add that the Global Oneness Day is a tremendous form of spiritual leadership, and I'm really, proud to be part of it.
Thanks, Steve. I always notice at certain junctures in these conversations that there seems to be, in some of our minds, a disconnect between the leadership that we have and the leadership that we want. So I'm going to pose a question to my friend Bill Urey, who's very experienced at working at these situations that are very much in real time on the ground and challenging to people in desperate situations all over the world. So, Bill, as a general matter, so many people comment that the world doesn't have the leaders we need at this critical time in our history, but that's what we have. So if you had the opportunity to lead a peace process for the 21st century based in an understanding of oneness, let's say with the current leaders in the Middle East, how would you go about that? Like, what values would be important, or what are the kinds of challenges that we face in that critical area of the world that would lead us into the possibility of having a consciousness-based government in that realm?
That's quite a challenge, Barbara.
I'm sorry, but it's just a for instance, if you had the opportunity to lead the peace process.
Okay. Well, to me, I was originally trained as an anthropologist, a student of the human story, and my passion happens to be peace. And the way I see it, and what I see the Middle East as being a kind of a microcosm of, we're living in an age of what anthropologists might call the human family reunion, where all the different tribes on the planet, all the different language groups, and anthropologists might say there are 15,000 of them, are for the first time connected to each other, in touch with each other, aware of each other. And like most family reunions that we know, it's not all peace and light, and there's a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anger and even hatred. And so the question is, how do we learn to get along with each other? And the Middle East, to me, is a little bit like if humanity were, one single body, the Middle East is a little bit like the pinched nerve of the human body. It's where all the pain tends to get referred. And the question is, how do you release that pain? But the Middle East, to me, when people focus on the Middle East, we focus about them as if it's them, but it's actually us. It's the children of Abraham. It's for whatever reason, the Middle East is kind of the symbolic heart of the planet, which is why it draws so much attention. And the struggle that's going on there, that's actually a struggle going on in the entire planet right now, and actually within each one of us, is how do we respond to this human family reunion? Do we respond, as some of us are tempted, by separating ourselves and by defending ourselves and attacking others, in other words, by exclusion, or do we try, as hard as it might be, to include? And those are the two tendencies right now, and the jury is still out about which one will prevail. But the kind of leadership that we need, going back to your question, is a leadership that's grounded in the unity of humanity and grounded in the practice of radical inclusion, which involves the very difficult act of including even those who are excluding us. There's a poem I've always loved from an American poet from the 30s, Edwin Markham, which goes, "They drew a circle and shut me out, a rebel, a heretic, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took them in." And that, to me, is, that strategy of people drawing circles, shutting people out on the basis of religion, on the basis of nationality, on the basis of gender, on the basis of difference in ideology. We tend to do that just defensively. We're pushing them out, and so we drop bombs, we kill, whatever we do. And to me, the challenge, which I think, in terms of going back to leadership, which was heralded by people like Gandhi or King or Mandela or Malala, which is to include even the excluders. And to me, that's the basis on which, we'd have to kind of reimagine what would go on in the Middle East. But for example, just to take that very particular thing, is it possible to envision, for example, a community? I grew up part of my childhood in Europe. If you were in the ruins of Europe in 1945 and you said, 50 years from now or 60 years from now, this will be the most peaceful, prosperous part of the planet, people would have thought you were insane. But basically, they evolved an inclusive community, economic, political, cultural, based on a kind of an idea of Europe. And the question is that possible in the Middle East? Can we plant the seeds of something that a generation from now or even earlier might be a community of Abraham, or whatever, the shared identity, the shared cultural story of that region is this ancient journey taken by Abraham, and based on some kind of shared economy. That happens because it's the place that so many people care about, billions of people on the planet care about. It has incredible potential for tourism. So for me, the future of the Middle East is, do we go towards terrorism or do we go towards tourism? And it's basically I think the key principle there, I mean, when I go to the Middle East, as I was not too long ago, talking, for example, to leaders on all sides in the Syrian civil war, the word that I keep on hearing, to me, that's kind of the keynote, which was a word that was mentioned earlier, is the word dignity. What would it mean, to ask the question, what would it mean to found a community based on human dignity in all its forms? Personal dignity, economic dignity, being able to make a livelihood, political dignity, having a voice, and cultural dignity, the respect for differences. And to me, that's where I would begin the conversation about peace. Radical inclusion.
I think radical inclusion. I was thinking as you were speaking that sometimes the problem is we tend to create a demonized stereotype as opposed to realizing that a culture and a region is made up of individuals, human beings with individual thoughts and their own values, and as much as they are products of their culture, they are also unique expressions, and some are more open to the ideas of inclusion than others, and that's a complicated discussion. But I know that in your work, you've always looked for how to include those people who are basically ready to move to a higher level of the discussion, or open to the possibilities of cooperation and reconciliation rather than the fundamentalist elements, which are very hard to change from outside rather than from within. If you could, just before I ask a question of Ambassador Chowdhury, could you just give us a few minutes to describe what you've done with the Abraham Path Initiative?
For sure.
I have not done anything about that. You are asking me?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I was asking Bill Urey, Ambassador, before I had a question for you about the United Nations.
Okay, I think the sentence did not reach me properly.
I'm sorry. Yes, please. We're just wrapping up with Bill's answer about an initiative that he's been very involved in the Middle East.
The Abraham Path actually has everything to do with this need for inclusion and respect for human dignity. It's basically very simply it's a path that retraces the footsteps of Abraham and his family 4,000 years ago that ends up as a thread reconnecting the entire Middle East and going through 10 different countries, just following the cultural memory of this journey that unites everyone in that region. So it's a reminder that we're all one family in the end, one human family. And Abraham is loved and revered in that region as well as around the world for kindness towards strangers, for hospitality, for loving kindness. And that's a value that I think we all need to remember in this time of globalization. And so the path is a little bit like, the famous pilgrimage path in Europe of Santiago de Compostela, or, the Appalachian Trail here, but going through the Middle East. And it seemed like a wild and crazy idea, but over the last 5 or 6 years, it's actually coming into incipient reality, and it now exists in different parts of the Middle East as a walkable path, welcoming hundreds, and actually there are thousands of people who've begun to walk it, and it exists. And if you go on the Abraham Path website, abrahampath.org, it's kind of an online guidebook, but it's something that's being created. It's not really a creation; we're just dusting off these footsteps, but it's to evoke the value that people in that region are most proud of, which is a secret to the rest of the world, but which is the way in which strangers, unbelievably, are treated as sacred guests. And if you walk the path, you will find out what I mean, because you stay in people's homes and they welcome you into their homes. And so it's a very different image than the image that we now have of the Middle East, which is all of war and conflict. And it actually reaches back to that divine spark that exists in everyone, and that Ervin Laszlo was talking about. And so I invite everyone to look at it and think about walking it with us physically or virtually.
That's a marvelous project, Bill, I have to say. That's really great.
Yeah. It's really important that people actually hear about what is possible, not only is possible, but is being demonstrated right now. I believe it was cited as one of the most important new walking paths or journeys of its kind by National Geographic. Isn't that right this year?
That's right. The National Geographic Traveler has a kind of cover story about the 10 best new walking trails in the world. Walking trails like around the Himalayas or in Provence or in Wales or in Italy and various places. And number one they cited was the Abraham Path. It just suggests that it does exist. It's an incipient reality, and it's awaiting all of our footsteps.
Exactly, and as Gandhi put it, peace is possible. So I'd like to go on, and now, Ambassador Chowdhury, I'd like to speak with you for a moment. You've devoted so much of your life in service of a more peaceful and just world through the United Nations. You know how much good an enormous global organization can accomplish, and you know how challenging it can be to accomplish things through an enormous bureaucracy. So I'd like to ask you to speak a little bit about what signs of a new leadership for the 21st century do you see within the UN itself, and what are some of the things that characterize that kind of leadership?
Well, before doing that, Dr. Fields, I would recollect what happened in May, on 20th of May in 2010, when Humanities team initiated 50,000 signatures from 168 countries appealing to the world body, the United Nations, to declare an annual Global Oneness Day, recognizing humanity's inner unity. They were not received by anybody from the United Nations. I came out of the United Nations a few years before that, and as a former Under-Secretary General, civil society decided that they will hand over the petition to me, and I was delighted, honored, and excited to receive those petitions in front of the meditation room of the United Nations on 20th of May 2010. And that year was the first UN for the first Global Oneness Day, because the petitioners appealed to the member states and the United Nations to declare such a day. And I told them that given the politics of the United Nations, it may be an uphill task for many years to achieve that decision. So I suggested to them that go ahead and declare one chosen day as the Global Oneness Day, initiated by the civil society of the world. And so that is what resulted in it was 24th of October. And happy United Nations to all of you, because that is the day which was chosen to have the first Global Oneness Day observed in 2010. And from that, every year we are now having this, and I'm delighted I had participated in few of your earlier days and this one. So I believe that this on that occasion I said that unless we have a sense of solidarity among the peoples of the world, all our efforts for development and peace and security will go nowhere. And I think the concept of oneness brings about an appreciation of humanity's interdependence, which supports tolerance, understanding, and solidarity. These are the necessary steps towards peace. So let me mention that United Nations, as the most universal body existing now had been able to trigger many initiatives which has enriched humanity as a whole in terms of regular processes in life, and also in terms of bringing nations, regions of the world together. And I would like to emphasize on this occasion, in the context of your question, the panel before us discussed spirituality in the world in the context of global oneness. And I believe that spirituality and oneness are conceptually very well integrated, and that is very important for us to bear in mind as we are talking about new leadership. So what I would suggest that in this context, that leadership will not emerge on its own unless it has a citizenry, or it has peoples who would throw up that kind of leadership of the new era that we are expecting to enter. And that is closely linked with the idea or the concept of what the UN is now espousing very strongly, that is the concept of global citizenship. Global citizenship is an important element in the Global Education First initiative of the Secretary General of the United Nations. He has launched that initiative in 2012, and out of the three objectives of that initiative, the first one is, of course, increasing enrollment in the schools, creating facilities. Second is the quality of education, and third, that education should lead to creation of global citizens all over the world. I think that is a very important conceptual and practical effort which is being made by the United Nations to connect with the newer visions that are emerging now throughout the world. And I think that global solidarity perception will be strengthened by global citizenship, which can be promoted through education. And I believe that two things are very well connected, and the UN had been in the forefront of in making initiatives and efforts in these two areas. The first is, of course, the culture of peace, which was created through a conceptual development that one has to have peace first. The inner peace is very important so that we can transform that into a global peace. So peace within is very important for all of us, for the humanity, to embrace global peace. And that program of action of the United Nations on the culture of peace has been energizing civil society, the member states, organizations and institutions in a big way. We have been having a political sort of support to that conceptual development, and actions reflecting implementation of those. That program of action is coming through a high-level global forum that the President of the United Nations General Assembly is convening every year since 2012. So that is a kind of new leadership that I believe that UN is encouraging and is also supporting in a very effective way. The United Nations, I believe, is composed of, firstly, member states Secondly, the Secretariat, thousands of UN staff led by the UN Secretary General. And third, I believe, third group is civil society, the people's organizations who need to support the work and need to actually effectively implement the decisions of the United Nations, be it for the Millennium Development Goals, and now we are creating the Sustainable Development Goals for the next 15 years. So all these things cannot be implemented effectively, particularly at the national level, without civil society. And so leadership...
No, please, I was just
going... Let me conclude
please.
With one more sentence. And all these things are now coming to the forefront with the strong support to equality of women's participation. And I believe that leadership, new leadership, has to recognize and include equal and full participation of women at all decision-making levels. That is an essential element without which no new leadership model can be thought of in this world. And I think United Nations is supporting those areas in a very strong way. I am done.
Well, I'm certainly not going to argue with your last point. My motto is, she who does the work has the power. So I'd like to continue a thought that you initiated a moment ago, and it has to do with all the different levels of participation that go into forming new leadership. So I think this question is for Steve McIntosh. We had a conversation not too long ago, and we talked about distinguishing between hierarchical leadership and shared leadership more at a grassroots level. How to balance the gifts of enlightened institutions with those of enlightened citizenship, which Ambassador Chowdhury was just now referring to. So given that we all have different roles to play that reflects our passion or our purpose, and we can't really measure this by what's more or less valuable, how do we translate this into collaboration and cooperation at both levels?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think, though, you said we can't really judge this in terms of what's more valuable or less valuable. I think that's indeed our duty. That's the duty of effective leadership, is to be able to see which way is forward. To sort of, as I mentioned earlier, I conceive of leadership as filling people's needs. And people's needs are often directly related to the problems that they face, both material and spiritual, cultural, spiritual, all kinds of problems. So solving those problems involves having a keen sense of the direction of greater value, the direction of solution. So I think it's our duty to be aware that too much hierarchy is certainly a negative thing, but to vilify hierarchy and eliminate it all in any kind of leadership situation can be equally dysfunctional. Cooperation and competition, so to speak, these are in a polarity where each side needs the other, right? Each side generates value in its own way, and the two sides of any kind of polarity like that generate value most effectively when they're ruled by the other side of the polarity, right? When they're, rather than being stifled by it. But to translate this into something pragmatic, one of the things that our central focus at the moment with the Institute for Cultural Evolution, which is this nonprofit think tank I'm founding with some others, we're working on developing an effective method for evolving consciousness, for raising consciousness. Because in some ways, every problem, almost every human problem, except for maybe a natural disaster, can be understood as a problem of consciousness. Because if we could effectively raise consciousness or evolve consciousness around these problems, we'd have an effective solution. I mean, if we're participating in the emergence of a new worldview, as you spoke of at the beginning, then this worldview, like the emergence of previous worldviews in history, is going to need an essential method. So just like the modernist worldview brought forth the scientific method, right, which improved the human condition immensely, the worldview that we're participating in now, I think, promises to have a kind of a method. I mean, if we were as good at raising consciousness as we are at curing disease, if we had a science of the internal realms of consciousness and culture that could sort of reach hold and grab hold of people's consciousness, gently persuading them to take a wider view or to persuade them into a higher level of awareness, then we'd have something equivalent to a kind of a second enlightenment. So that's how I conceive of leadership in terms of the evolution of consciousness, and getting practical about it means exploring and developing this method.
Well, that sounds like it's not exactly a quantifiable methodology in terms that we've encountered before, because it's easy enough to understand biology and neurophysiology in linear terms, but the kinds of practices that you're talking about now are a little less precise in that way. So, I mean, the concept of it is absolutely intriguing, and I know that you're doing some incredible work, but I wonder how this translates among different cultures outside of our Western way of thinking.
Sure. Well, there's plenty of metrics that we could apply to measuring the evolution of consciousness. I think the most reliable one is the fruits of the beautiful, the true, and the good that people can bear in their lives, whether it's the fruits of beauty, truth, and goodness in an organization, or the fruits of the spirit in the lives of individuals. Again, this calls not really the context where we can get into some of the more meaty details of that, but measuring it and grabbing hold, making concrete what was once abstract or vague is part of the task of leadership for the 21st century.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's intriguing. I'll switch tracks a little bit. I know that Bill Urey accompanied my friends at the Association for Global New Thought and other world leaders and thinkers to a couple of events where we met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Bill, I think you were in India and in Italy with us, right?
I was in Italy and Trent and Rome, yeah.
Right. And, I just wanted to mention for a moment that if we came from many different places for those meetings, and we had a lot of different orientations among us, but there seemed to be a kind of great universal leveler of the playing field in His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who was speaking in very clear terms of values like compassion and kindness and nonviolence, not because they were Buddhist or because they belonged to any segment of the society, but because they seemed to be intrinsic values shared by all human beings. So I wonder if you remember anything about that experience and that you could share now.
I do. They were called the Synthesis Dialogues, and it was a really unusual meeting of people from civil society, people from many different faith backgrounds, and meeting with the Dalai Lama. And one thing that always strikes me is just was the Dalai Lama telling us a story about a monk who had come to him who had been imprisoned and tortured, actually, for many years in a prison in China. And when he arrived to see the Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama asked him, were you afraid during all those years of imprisonment? And the monk said, yes, I was afraid. And the Dalai Lama said, what were you most afraid of? And he said, I was most afraid of losing compassion for my jailers. And that story of that monk, I mean, someone who had gone through incredible suffering, and yet what his focus was not losing that spark, that light that allowed him to understand and feel compassion and empathy for his jailers, to me points the way to what very practically we need to relearn and learn, which is a kind of empathy that all of us have, that gift of empathy. Every child has it, and it's about cultivating it. And I'm inspired by many different schools and innovation of how do you kind of cultivate that ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes, and perhaps the key practice in that is the practice very practically of listening, of actually listening not in the way that we ordinarily think of listening, which is just hearing the words, but actually listening to what's behind the words, listening to the human being there, listening to their heart. And coming back to the theme of leadership, to me, that's my dream, is a world in which every child, we teach listening as importantly as we teach reading. That in fact, listening is learning how to read other human beings. It's learning how to connect. And to me, that's the practice of oneness. And I look forward to a world in which we choose our leaders based on how well they listen, not just on how well they talk.
Did you just come up with that one on the spot?
I did.
Because that's really a good point. I like that. It makes...
Which also acts. It is also very important. Listens, but also acts accordingly.
Yes, I think there's a sequence there. In fact, when I'm speaking with all of you, it comes to mind that before we talk about what our new leaders consist of, we're actually having a conversation about an actual new way of defining leadership itself. I think it might in the future look very different than it has in the past. And I think that some of the methods we use now for global communications, most importantly internet and social media, have changed, especially for the next generation culture, have changed the playing field quite significantly. And their ability to listen and interact with one another in generations that come after us is painting for them quite a different picture than the one that we grew up with, which was an extremely exclusive and separatist picture. And I hold out great hope for the future because I'm in contact with some of these younger ones who really have a much broader understanding of brothers and sisters in other cultures because they grew up interacting with these people and they don't really see them as different or other. Is there anyone on the panel who would like to comment about that?
I would like, this is Anwarul Chaudhry, and I would like to emphasize also the other sort of side of identifying new leadership. That is, the leadership has to also grow from the citizenry, the people. And that is why I emphasized the aspect of global citizenship. Today's people, given the interdependence and interconnectedness of the world, has to feel as a part of a bigger human family. They have to believe in oneness of humanity. That is extremely important. Unless we grow up learning that, I think the leadership which will come out of our societies, communities, will not reflect the true leaders that we need to run the world in a peaceful, non-violent way. And at the same time, develop in a way that it makes the quality of each of our communities' life better.
Bill, you've got an amazing daughter who's 16 now. Is that right?
Right.
What are so I can imagine some of the conversations you're having in your kitchen these days. What are some of Gabby's thoughts about where the world is going?
Well, she's actually had a rather unusual story. She came to those synthesis dialogues that you were talking about in Rome with the Dalai Lama.
And so did your dog, by the way, your poodle.
Right. All sentient beings, and she's grown up in a world where she speaks many different languages, Portuguese and Spanish and English. Her mother's from Brazil, so she's a global citizen, as the ambassador was saying, and as are her brothers. And one thing I think that they're clear about is young people these days are connected through the web in a way that's just seamless across the world. And for example, she set as a goal for herself for her 16th birthday. She had many surgeries in her life and in a hospital, and she decided for her 16th birthday that she was going to break a world record for holding the abdominal plank, and it was impossible for her because she was abdominally challenged. But lo and behold, on her 16th birthday, she was able to actually hold this position, which I can barely hold for a minute. She was able to hold it for an hour and 20 minutes and break the world record and enter this Guinness Book of World Records. And doing it, and this is key, she decided to do it to raise awareness and for children who have to spend time in hospitals and raise funds. So she raised funds for the Children's Hospital here from all over the world, from at least 30 or 40 different countries, using the web. And that's a kind of and I think her video that she circulated went to, I think, over 150 different countries, over 100,000 downloads, and she was able to raise, in a few days, $58,000 for children who have special needs like her. And it just, to me, is an example of the leadership of young people these days, super empowered by the power of the web and their ability to reach each other across the world. And so that's the kind of, that inspires me to think about what the next generation can do to actually bring about this global leadership that's so dearly needed.
I know. That video was one of the few things that actually brought me to tears in quite a long time. I mean, it's an incredible story, and as we're winding up here, we've just got a couple minutes left, and I'm going to ask you all just to share a couple of thoughts. But I think it's important that not only should we be sober and informed about the real challenges that we face in terms of leadership in the world, but because this is Global Oneness Day, and because we're here on the planet to manifest what we will, and I would prefer to choose hope rather than annihilation. When I think about things like that and what young people are doing today, I would like to leave us with the idea that there's hope and there's blessing and there's joy that we can invoke everywhere if we just listen and pay attention and open our eyes. So Steve or Bill or Ambassador Chowdhury or Irvin, if you still happen to be with us, does anyone have any parting remarks?
Well, I believe this is Anwar Chowdhury again, and I believe that a deeper understanding of global oneness is very key, and that is why I believe that this day will contribute in a big way to creating the global citizens that we are talking about. And I believe that all the people who are involved and connected with energizing summit on the occasion of the Global Oneness Day needs to be commended immensely by all of us. And I believe that this is a wonderful initiative and should expand more and more in the coming years.
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much, Ambassador Chowdhury and Steve McIntosh and Bill Ury and Irvin, who's not with us on the call. But thank you for making the time today. You know, I know to me and to the many people who are listening from all over the world that this is very, very important to hear from you, and we're very grateful for your time. So before we move on to our next panel, which is actually a keynote interview by Steve Farrell with Marianne Williamson, I'd like to say again thank you and goodbye, and we'll take about 10 seconds of silence before we move on to the next program.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks
for leading us.
Sure.